Well, I'd like to welcome everyone to this 8 a.m. session, which we've titled the Religious Studies Project. This is a session which is very cross-disciplinary. You all notice that the speakers come from a variety of different backgrounds. We have some new and up-and-coming talent. We have some very much established talent, which is good. But all the papers have very unique and interesting ideas, and we're handpicked and chosen for this panel. My name is Chris Silver. I'll be the convener for today. What will be a little different about this panel versus some of the others is I'll actually give a brief introduction of the speaker prior to the speakers coming and speaking. Each of the speakers has between 15 to 18 minutes to give their talk. So our first presenter is actually Paul Williamson, who's actually presented a lecture on the Religious Studies Project before, which was really good. Paul's a professor at Henderson State University. Been involved in a variety of academic research and psychology of religion. He actually, in his past life, was a full-time clergy member within the Pentecostal tradition, and after leaving that career, went and pursued a PhD at Knoxville, University of Tennessee at Knoxville. And so he's, of course, co-authored a variety of texts in the field of psychology of religion and done extensive work on the survey handling sects of Appalachia, which is really interesting. So if you all will welcome Dr. Paul Williamson.
Thanks, Chris. That was a generous introduction. And as he mentioned, I have done research in several different areas. And what I wanted to talk to you today about is research that comes from an area that I began some 20 years ago when I made a change to academia and collaborated with Ralph Hood, who also is here. And that is research with serpent handling sects. Religious groups that bring poison serpents to church and handle them under the inspiration of the Spirit. But more specifically today, I wanted to talk to you about another practice that they engage, and that is the drinking of poison as a response to a scriptural passage. These often are referred to as signs-following believers. In fact, they often refer to themselves as signs-following believers because they practice 5 specific signs. And among these that are listed, you will note, or you may be aware, that 3 of these are not unique to serpent handlers. They are also practiced by mainstream Pentecostals, casting out devils, tongue-speaking, laying on of hands. And the reason that these groups practice these signs is because of some biblical directives found in Mark chapter 16 in the King James Version, where Jesus, just before his ascension to heaven, gathered his disciples around and said that these signs shall follow them that believe. And so these signs are enumerated here, and they perceive the phrase shall as being an imperative, that if you're going to be a true believer, you will practice these signs. Now, the drinking of poison, which shows up as a 4th sign, is not viewed to be an imperative because it is prefaced by the condition if they drink. However, they do believe that at the willing of the Spirit, that believers should, in fact, drink poison when they are bidden to do so by the Spirit. Now, my guess is none of you have ever seen this happen. So I'm going to give you a little glimpse of a very unique piece of videography that I did about 18 years ago. And I think that this was the first time that I myself... Chris, what do I do here? I don't see the thing showing up.
Should just play. No, I can play it.
There we go. I don't think we're going to have any music, but or any sound. But you'll notice he's picked up what we refer to as a mason fruit jar, a quart fruit jar, and it's probably around 2/3, 3/4 full. As you can see, there's a lot of expansive worship that goes on in these meetings. looks like maybe a little over half. Other believers are gathered around. There are no serpents that are out at this point in time. They're just engaging in worship and enjoying what they understand to be the presence of God. Now, this is kind of unusual in most instances where I've seen poison drinking take place or strychnine drinking take place. There typically is only one, sometimes two people that do this. But this is a unique clip in that you'll note that there are multiple people that are engaging in this act. And then before he puts it back, he decides he himself is going to take another drink. And you'll know it's the level has come down quite a bit. Now, I'm not going to take time to talk about various research that's been done. There's not a great deal of research in this area, but what does exist, very little attention has been given to strychnine or poison drinking itself. If we have time at the end, I'll talk about the fact that we did have a sample analyzed, taken to an independent laboratory, and it did, in fact, fall within the realms of toxicity. So my main concern for this particular project is not to explain why or to address causality that exists with this practice, but my main concern is to discover a very rich, thick description of the phenomenon, of what that they experience whenever they do engage this. So I was able to obtain or get the cooperation of 7 different participants who had drunk strychnine at least one time. You can see that they are represented in various southern and southeastern states. They had been active in the tradition for quite a while, and 4 of these 7 actually described that they had been hurt by strychnine on at least one occasion. The procedure involved the use of a phenomenological interview because I was wanting to understand what they are aware of during that experience. And so every interview began with this question: can you think about a time that you drank the deadly thing at church, and can you describe it for me in as much detail as you possibly can? And then we would engage in this interview for an hour, more or less, and they would describe as many of these experiences as they possibly could remember, those that stood out to them. And then I would follow up questions asking them what they were aware of, particular details that they could recall. And then I used a hermeneutic procedure to determine some themes of meaning that emerged from each of the protocols, and then looked at the consistency of themes across all protocols. And these are the 4 themes that emerged. First of all, they all described a desire to drink the poison, and for various reasons. But most often they talked about the desire to be a more full, they didn't use the word fledged, but a more full signs following believer. Most of them had, at this point, had cast out devils, had spoken in tongues, laid hands on the sick, cast out devils, but they had yet to follow what they perceived the Lord in all 5 signs. So they desired to drink the strychnine. And then they all talked about being able to understand when the timing was right for this because of sensing an embodiment of the Lord moving on them, God moving on them. And then there was the theme that once you drink the poison, you're already snake bit. Now, when you handle serpents, it's very rare to be bitten by a serpent. So you can take up a serpent, you can handle it successfully, put it away, you have nothing else to worry about. But if you drink poison, you're already snake bit. You have that in your system. And that becomes something of their awareness. And then the last theme has to do with this bipolar theme of victory and the devil troubling my mind, because after that they would drink the poison, they would feel a sense of what they called victory, an expansive state, and consequently they would also modulate to this point of the devil troubling their mind about what they had done. They were snake bit, and therefore they felt as though they were struggling. These would come to the forefront of awareness at any given time. The others would recede to the periphery of consciousness, and they would merge together and provide something of a figure ground experience. Now what I want to do is just take a couple of these and show you some evidence for where that they come from. For example, God moving on me was felt in terms of an embodiment of the anointing, and then also a felt insurance. So as far as the anointing is concerned, one of these talked about God moving on him in such a way that he felt whenever he experienced the move to handle serpents, but yet it was a little stronger. And then as he eyed the strychnine bottle underneath the Bible stand, he began to hesitate and put out a fleece before God and said, okay, God, if you really want me to do this, then what you need to do is allow this preacher who had been handling fire from a fire bottle and who had put the flame out, he said, if it's really you moving upon me, then have this preacher to relight this bottle, let him handle fire again, and then I'll know. So lo and behold, the preacher did. And so he said, well, okay. And he reached on the Bible stand, felt a great sense of the anointing, and picked up the jar, drank it, lost awareness of how much he was drinking. And then when he came to himself again, he noted he had drunk the entire content. Another talked about it being experienced in terms of a physical thirst. Like you're out in the sun on a hot day, you want a cold glass of water. When the Lord moves on me, then I experience a physical thirst that I want to drink it. And then God moving on me had to do with insurance. He said, I felt the insurance that everything was going to be okay. And this is a powerful metaphor in the sense that he said it's like that you buy insurance for your automobile. And when you drive down the road, you don't worry about accidents, you don't worry about the consequences because you're fully insured. Everything will be taken care of. And so he said, when I feel that come on me and I drink the strychnine, he says, I feel like I'm protected from the harm. I've already talked about snake bit, and so I do want to talk about and maybe end with this notion of victory and devil troubling my mind. Whenever that they did drink the strychnine, they would talk about it being a great sense of feeling. In the middle of the page, he says, it's hard to describe. It's the most wonderful feeling that anybody can have. You feel it in your body, through your joints, down through your soul. And finally, one said, it's kind of like you feel a cool breeze out on a hot day. Then it gets a little stronger, and then eventually it's like a mighty rushing wind, and it just blows you over. The devil troubling my mind was experienced in the sense that you know that you're going to die, or the devil says you're going to die. You put the serpent in the box, it's over, but you drink this strychnine, the devil is fighting you. And another one said that it's like the devil's going to tell you it's going to hurt you. And you can just feel your mouth tightening up as you have the strychnine in your mouth. And then you'll really pray hard for the next 30 minutes or so because you don't want the spirit to leave you. This is an interesting capture of what it means to have victory, to lose victory, and to get back to the point of victory. This guy, after drinking the strychnine, was dancing, and then the devil began to inflict his mind with doubt. And then there was a woman that was nearby, and she began to lay hands on him and pray for him. And as she did, he says the Spirit of God began to come down upon him again to dance. And then he said, the peace that I felt in my soul, I said, everything is all right. The peace was joy. The peace was there. The joy was there. I felt like it was in my life. And at that very moment he was describing this, he also began to remanifest those kinds of feelings. So these themes can be looked together as providing some kind of enlightenment of what this experience of poison drinking is about. And if we were to end with this, which is a global description of tying all of these things together, we could say that the experience of poison drinking emerges from a context of Pentecostal worship. And it includes a desire to drink that rises from a deep yearning to become a full signs following believer. As worship ensues, the believer feels God moving on me with a markedly strong anointing felt in various ways through an answered fleece, a sensed leading, God's directed voice, a tightening in the face and throat, a physical thirst. The anointing also arouses a feeling of insurance that it will be okay. With taking in the poison, there comes an awareness of being already snake bit, which is overcome with the sense of insurance and a great feeling of victory as when handling a serpent with impunity. The recurring awareness of being snake bit, however, interrupts victory with thoughts of the devil troubling my mind about harm from the poison and even possible death. This conflict of doubt eventually gives way to the return of victory marked by peace, joy, satisfaction, and spiritual perfection. So this set of interviews actually illuminates how it is that what might be otherwise seen as a bizarre act outside the context of meaning takes on rich meaning, and it even allows for a transcendence of death, which is a central theme in Christianity. And probably as much as anything else, it helps them to note that they have become full believers in all of the signs, full signs following believers. So I think that's about my time.
All right. So the next presentation is actually by Dr. April Stace Vega. Did I say that right? She actually just received her PhD in Religion and Culture from the Catholic University of America in May. Her dissertation is actually very interesting. She did an ethnographic study of the eight congregations in Washington, D.C. area that use secular music in their worship services. She's published in the area of religion and popular culture as well as worship, and she's currently editing a volume on the emerging church, interdisciplinary perspectives, and let's see, Dr. Vega.
Thank you. So I'm going to begin our time this morning with a dramatic reading. I got the eye of the tiger, a fighter dancing through fire, because I am a champion and you're going to hear me roar. Louder, louder than a lion, because I am a champion and you're going to hear me roar. You're going to hear me roar. Anybody recognize it? Katy Perry, indeed, who recently was on my Twitter feed because she dressed as a Cheeto for Halloween. So these lyrics do not, at first glance or first listen, appear to be highly expressive of any Christian doctrine or ideal. They don't jump out at us as ones that would necessarily be at home in venues of Christian worship. Roar contains lyrics that reference inner strength, the ability to overcome obstacles. It was described in Slate, in Rolling Stones as and in Rolling Stones as a kind of a jock jams pastiche, style of music that blends bubblegum pop with influences from rock bands such as Queen. And although Perry herself was at one point a Christian vocalist, her first attempt at becoming a pop star was really in the Christian musical market. She was unsuccessful there, and so a couple years later managed to do a comeback as a much more successful mainstream pop star. And she has since disavowed that stage in her life. I think she's a preacher's daughter, actually. She no longer sings about Christian ideas or themes or anything spiritual. Nevertheless, the first time I heard the song Roar was in a worship service at a large evangelical church in Washington, D.C. The band performed the song during the offering. The service began in a manner typical to a large non-denominational church. In a darkened theater-style room, the band performed several songs with overtly religious lyrics, and the congregation stood and sang along with the lyrics that were projected on the screens. After these songs, a pastor came on the stage and welcomed everyone, offered a prayer, and said a few words about what the service would be like that day. He then explained that they would be taking an offering, which was obligatory only if you were a regular church member, if you were there every week. And then he said, while the offering is being collected, our band's going to play a little song because our church is going to roar in the years to come. And so then the same band that had played the religiously themed songs began to play Katy Perry's song. However, the congregation did not stand and sing along. There was just an image of kind of blue and green bubbles that was on the screen, and they were looking through their wallets and writing stuff down to put into the baskets that were being passed around. The song ended, and then the sermon began. As the sermon was on early church, early Christians, and instructing the congregation on how to be more like the early church. So the song by Katy Perry kind of came and went without much more comment. It was just kind of there. At another church nearby, popular music was used with more explicit explanation. Here, the senior pastor played a recording of the song Holding Out for a Hero by Bonnie Tyler. After the song was played, he read the lyrics of the first verse and described what it felt like to be in need of a hero during life's difficult moments. He then continued, he said, "I chose this title for this morning's message because as we continue to work through the initial hours of mankind's first marriage, it becomes more and more clear that they are in fact in need of a hero. Over the past couple of weeks, we have seen how Adam and Eve took an incredibly idyllic and blissful situation in the Garden of Eden and turned it upside down." And then he continued his sermon about Adam and Eve and relating it to modern-day marriage. So at this church, secular music, popular music, was used as a teaching tool, with lyrics highlighted and referred to throughout the course of the sermon. So it was integrated in that way. The debate over using popular secular music in worship is a current one amongst American evangelicals. Some of the largest and most influential churches in the U.S. regularly find themselves reaching out what is normally considered sacred music for Sunday morning, and debate has ensued over the appropriateness of this inclusion. For example, a video posted on churchleaders.net, which is a website geared towards evangelical pastors, featured a debate between several high-profile evangelical pastors about the decision of Perry Noble, who is the senior pastor at New Spring Church in South Carolina, the fourth largest church in the Southern Baptist Convention. It averages around 32,000 attenders every Sunday. His decision to open the Easter morning service in 2009 with the song Highway to Hell by rock band AC/DC. This was on Easter morning. So this was a little controversial. No consensus was reached at that time between the pastors about whether this was appropriate or not. But the responses of the pastors and the responses, interestingly, of those in the comment section on this website show that this is really part of a larger debate going on within American evangelicalism. It's a discussion that involves questions about boundaries between the church and the culture, the sacred and the secular, and between the individual and the church, an individual and the congregation. So the music in question, the music that was at the center of this study, is what I term popular secular. Because you really need both descriptors. It's popular because it's in kind of the popular music genre. It's secular because it has no religious content in the lyrics, and is performed by artists who have no known or overt connection to any form of Christianity. So, for instance, the music of U2 would not have interested me in this study, because U2, although they are a very successful mainstream popular band, have well-known connections to Christianity and often sing songs with covert or overt Christian themes in their music. However, this music, this popular secular music, is interesting to me when it is used in what's often considered really the most sacred time for a Christian, which is the worship service. Now, American evangelicals, of course, have a history of using popular media and culture to spread their message of salvation to larger numbers of people. They also have a history of deep ambivalence toward popular music in particular. Famously, of course, in the 1960s, evangelicals railed against rock music and youth culture as being from Satan, even staging occasionally well-publicized record burnings. However, evangelicals were also among some of the first to promote Christian rock music. So evangelicals have historically understood popular culture as something from which to draw and also something with which to compete. That being said, I do want to note that I use the term evangelical, well aware that it's a pretty problematic term. Evangelicals are not a monolithic group. The churches in my study, for example, held varying positions on the role of women in worship, even on homosexuality, biblical interpretation. So they were not uniform in terms of where they would place on what we'd say maybe a liberal conservative spectrum. So although all the churches in my study had evangelical roots, they're probably best understood as part of the subset of churches that Donald Miller termed New Paradigm churches in the 1990s, and more recently Justin Wilford wrote about in terms of post-denominational evangelical churches. These churches tend to emphasize decentralized leadership. They often have small group ministries, sometimes do not require any kind of formal education for their clergy. They emphasize informality and authenticity, and worship is just about always in what's called the contemporary style, in what I described in the beginning. There's a rock band on stage, there's screens with lyrics projected, and they sing songs with Christian themes, but it's in more of a rock style. Pastors typically deliver their sermons in a very conversational tone, and it's not uncommon for them to refer to items in popular culture in the sermon, not just music. So altogether, I conducted interviews and site visits at a total of 12 churches that fit this profile of a church in the suburbs of Washington, D.C. over the course of 3 years. At each church, I interviewed the person or the people, it was usually more than one person, who were responsible for making decisions about what music was included in the worship service. And just a note about that, why I focused my interviews on those people in particular. I undertook this study with the goal of understanding why churches like these would feel the need to incorporate popular secular music. Therefore, I chose to focus my research on those who have the power to design these rituals, the worship service and their music, because my question is really about what the leaders in these churches are trying to accomplish, not on what is being accomplished. So the question of congregational response and congregational experience of this music is a really important one, but it's a different one. It's a really different question than what I was trying to get at. And I don't mean to imply that what the leaders are doing or how they believe the music is functioning is somehow more important. I don't think it is. I just needed to focus on one or the other first. So I chose to focus on the people who plan the ritual. So many themes emerged through these interviews and through these site visits. Today, I just want to talk about one of the themes that emerged throughout all of the churches that I visited. So while all the leaders in this study articulated that they believed worship was about God and not about us, self-expression was often understood to be part of the activity of truly worshiping God. Thus, all the music in the service, both sacred and popular secular, was often described in terms of its ability to encourage authentic expression of the self to God during the service. However, popular secular music was believed to have a special ability to express real feeling in a way that sacred music could not, and therefore aid in this project of increasing self-expression and reflection. A music director at a church in the Virginia suburbs described how he used popular secular music to evoke certain emotions in his congregation as follows. He said, "The music evokes something in students or in myself or other people that helps to acknowledge heartbreak or feelings of longing in relationships or with God, or express some kind of connection to something happening in life that might be happening. So the table is set for people to be honest about what is happening in life, so that we enter in worship with people actually feeling this stuff. Church is where you bring who you are, not the best version, not the fake version. I want those songs, even if they're just in the background. Every week I select 3 or 4, some are on the radio, some are not, that say something to hopefully get people to think and are sitting there before the service if they want that time." Another music director from the Maryland suburbs explained his rationale for including the song "Some Nights" by the band Fun in worship on Sunday. He said, "I think the reason we're doing it is because there's a ton of truth in there. It's about a guy who's at a place in his life where he is just feeling empty. He's done a lot of things in his life and he doesn't feel like he can go on sometimes. That's a really real feeling." The boundary between sacred and secular music is crossed in these churches in order to access music that is perceived to have the ability to express these really real feelings, so that an authentic engagement with God might be precipitated. However, although the interviewees did not want to differentiate between sacred and secular music, one interviewee, for example, said to me, "Jesus didn't die to save music, he died to save people. There's no such thing as secular music." They did refer instead to a different binary, and that's the binary between worship and non-worship music. Before I say a little bit about what that signifies on a deeper level, I want to just describe what that meant in performance practice. So worship music that was described as worship music, was the music that had overtly Christian lyrics. And in the service, people would usually stand to sing it. They would see the lyrics on the screen. They would sing along. music that was not considered worship music, the popular secular music, or even some kind of instrumental music sometimes, didn't have any lyrics. People were not standing together. They were usually just sitting. Sometimes they were given explicit instructions to sit and think about the song. Sometimes it just happened, like the Katy Perry song. It just kind of came and went. So it's treated very differently within the service, despite that it all happens in the service. So the popular secular music is not considered secular. My interviewees definitely, they wanted to say, no, all music is sacred. There's no such thing as secular music. But it's only considered inappropriate for corporate singing. The music is listened to, again, while they're seated and they're thinking about it. So why does this matter, then, if the sacred-secular binary is still kind of in place, but just with different language? Well, I think that the language is actually pretty significant. Popular secular music, or non-worship music, is appropriate for the worship service, but it's not appropriate for worshiping. Popular secular music is perceived to open the soul, one's true self, to God, and so therefore is affirmed, embraced, and celebrated. However, it is still set apart from worship music. One music director described it to me like this. He said, the other thing we do in secular songs is that we do try to perform them. We try to sing them and perform them differently than we do a worship song. Mainly, we want people to be able to sit and think about the lyrics. So non-worship music is performed, while worship music is not performed. Of course, both types of music are actually performed in the same way, performed by live musicians, but the way that the performers are taught to think about it, the way that the music directors describe it is different. So secular music is performed, whereas worship music is done with worship. It's not a performance. So of course, the expression of really real feeling or the performance of music in order that the congregation might engage in self-reflection is often valued only insofar as it can serve in the larger project of bringing people's belief systems in line with certain behavioral and doctrinal norms. For example, at one small church in Virginia, they used the song Heartbreak Warfare by John Mayer. The pastor played a recording of the song and read the lyrics, and then described, again, in terms of, he talked about the lyrics in terms of isolation from God and things like that. And when he talked to me about it later, he explained, we want to recognize the fact that we're not afraid to look at hard things. At the same time, there's a filter that it needs to go through, and that we don't want to do things that dishonor God. That God recognizes that you have aches in your heart and questions about life, and it's okay to bring that here. So if it is a really real feeling then, if the song is perceived to recall emotions or experiences that the congregation members have had, the song is perceived as speaking truth. Popular secular music was believed in all the interviews I conducted to be able to speak to the human condition in a unique way, and was used to meet a need that sacred music or contemporary worship music was understood to not be able to do. These churches attempt to offer a model of how it's possible to be spiritual but not religious within an institutionalized form of religion. This tension is evident, for example, in the tagline of two of the churches that were in this study. It would say, X church, and then a church for people who don't go to church. That was their tagline. The use of popular secular music is integral to this endeavor, and furthermore, it is not the first time that church leaders have identified music as a way to achieve related goals. After all, we could go back and look 500 years ago at the Protestant Reformation. Martin Luther is often credited with adopting this culturally friendly hymnody that allowed new Protestants to sing their faith in the vernacular in a way that was attractive to them. But what's new about the use of this music in these churches, I think, is the role that music plays in individual identity formation and maintenance in contemporary American society since the advent of recording technology. Martin Luther, for example, could not have imagined a world in which people identify themselves in part through the media they consume, through the music that they listen to. The use of popular secular music affirms individual identity, experience, and aesthetic preference, even while other aspects of the worship service, including the worship music, the sermon, and the prayer, affirm a more communal identity, which suggests that one must submit to particular doctrines, beliefs, or practices. So far from understanding themselves to capitulating to an increasingly secularized society, which is where the people who don't like this practice, it's what they usually accuse them of. The music leaders in this study understood themselves to be battling against a secularizing society through the use of popular secular music in worship. self-actualization, self-expression, self-discovery, goals that are sometimes seen as being at odds with traditional evangelicalism, which has tended to stress conforming to various social roles, are reinterpreted so that they are no longer antithetical to it, but are instead incorporated into a more traditional approach. So popular secular music, then, is part of one of the larger aims of these churches, in which, to steal a phrase from Gerardo Marti yesterday, these congregations seek to legitimize individual religious selves. In using this music, the secular life and its associations are understood to be part of the not yet sacred, or the sacred as yet undiscovered. Thank you.
All right, so next, and I'm standing in your presentation, so it's and then make sure I pronounce this correctly. It's Tatsushi?
Yes.
Hirono?
Yes.
Who is currently an associate professor at Austin Peay University in the Department of Social Work. His interest is in spirituality and religion as well as mental health. He currently published a book about suicide prevention and the role of religious leaders. He also talks a lot about the role of American Christian and Buddhist clergy in suicide prevention, and he's now studying the role of clergy for natural disaster relief that is supported by the Tennessee Government Research Fund. So please welcome Dr. Hirono.
Hi, nice to meet you. I'm Dr. Hirono from the Austin Peay State University, Clarksville, Tennessee. So it takes like 5 to 6 hours last night. So I'm so sleepy, almost snowing. I'd like to come here. Looks like this. I'm originally from Japan, so I'm very interested in like different culture. Okay, so this is today's content. First, purpose and goals and methods, hypothesis, demographics, theories, and role of clergy, and questionnaires, results, discussions, and limitations. So next. So the purpose of this study is to examine the role of American, Philippines, and Japanese clergy in the natural disaster relief efforts for preventing post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. So definition of PTSD is broad. Sometimes like, I'm a social worker, so sometimes too narrow down, and sometimes too broad, but sometimes like very obvious and very hidden PTSD. So I'm focused much more general PTSD symptoms here. So 3 countries, the United States of America, and the Philippines and Japan have suffered multiple natural disasters since the 21st century began. For instance, a typhoon in Philippines, Hurricane Sandy and Katrina in the US, and the 80.9 magnitude earthquake in Japan occurred. So lots of natural disasters. So immediately after these devastating natural disasters, victims need shelter, water, food, and blanket. It's so true. However, 2 to 3 weeks after the disasters, they also need mental health support more than material ones, because maintaining hope might be important for natural disaster relief in the long term. So the victim might develop post-traumatic stress disorder, so-called PTSD symptoms. The investigator hypothesized the lesion would reduce the natural disaster victim's symptoms because since hope is a product of spirituality beliefs, the investigator hypothesized that the religion would promote resilience and thereby mitigate a natural disaster victim's PTSD symptoms. That's my idea. So investigator sent 500 mailing survey to Christian clergy in the greater New Orleans, New York areas, 500 mailing survey to Greater Manila, Tacloban, and 500 mailing survey to Buddhist clergy in the Greater Tokyo and Fukushima areas. But the thing is, returning rate is too low, actually, like 10% to like 15%. So I'm sending second wave, maybe third wave, so it takes a long time. Anyway, the questionnaire including 10 questions that ask clergy about their personal beliefs, the churches or temples' role in natural disaster relief, spiritual support for victims, and clerical counseling, as well as the clergy demographics. After collecting the data, the researcher quantitatively analyzed the data by mainly using chi-square and t-test. The researcher also qualitatively analyzed the open-ended questions. So those are research questions. First, how do creators perceive natural disaster relief efforts in the US, Philippines, and Japan? Second, do they see natural disaster differently? And third, what are the role differences of clergy in natural disaster relief efforts in the US, Philippines, and Japan? Those are my hypotheses. First, more Christian clergy than Buddhist clergy thinks that natural disaster relief is their obligation. Second, Christian clergy more actively join the natural disaster relief efforts than Buddhist clergy. And third, there are role differences related to natural disaster relief efforts in the Japan, Philippines, and American religious communities. So those gender are dominantly male, about 85%. Almost like Philippines and Japan is 100% here so far. And race ethnicity, Japan and the Philippines, basically they say Filipino or Japanese. And in US, Christian is Caucasian, about 75%, African American, 20%, about Native Americans, 3%, and Latino and Asian Pacific Islanders. So those are denominations difference. United Methodist, Lutheran in US, and also next one, in Roman Catholic also. Those percentile fortunately somehow reflect the entire percentile of denominations. So 24.5% Catholic and 60.3% Baptist. So in my survey, almost the same. So I'm lucky. And next one is also very similar to population about the ratio of Jodo and Jodo Shinshu in Japan, and Zenshu is a Zen Buddhist, and Shingon is also major denominations. Okay, so I use the theories basically based on biblical, Bible and the Buddhist sutra and dogma. And those theories create as a gatekeeper for maintaining hope. And other cultural theories, multiple cultural theories, especially like guilt and shame theories. Here, next. Okay. So another theoretical base is many people who lost their loved ones by natural disaster might be religious persons, and those survivors have an opportunity to speak with clergy about the meaning of life and hope during funerals, for instance. So those are questionnaires. First of all, first question, do you think how important of these factors that may contribute to natural disaster relief? Please rank 1 to 5, 6. So I use a t-test, and first of all, like food and fresh water support or shelter, those stuffs. And job support, transportation services, medical services, counseling service, clerical counseling, etc. So homeschool or tutoring, funeral, priest sermon, Bible studies. And next question is, do you think that you have an obligation to help people who are victimized by natural disasters? And please check yes or no. And also I asked the why question, why do you think so? So the multiple choice and other explanation. So do you think that, another question is, do you think that religion can help people's natural disaster relief efforts? So also ask a why question. So next question, do you think that counseling with pastor can help people's natural disaster relief efforts? So those are open-ended questions. So first, if you mention natural disaster during Mass or Bible study or congregation, what do you say? Or what do you say to families who have lost family members to natural disaster? So those are results. Obligation to help or not. There is a significant variance between religious differences, Christian and Buddhist, and thinking of natural disaster relief as an obligation. So I was surprised. Both US and Philippine Christian clergy said yes, 100%. However, in Japanese Buddhist clergy said 85% clergy said yes, but more than 10 clergy said 10%, more than 15%, about 15% clergy said no. So this is the same as Philippines. Yeah. And question 4, do you think that counseling with pastor can help people's natural disaster relief efforts? So also this is a significant. So American Christian clergy said yes. But the Japanese Buddhist clergy said about 80% said yes, but still like 20% said no. So another question is, what do you think are the most important factors? So significant differences in means of social factors for natural disaster relief between the response of American and Japanese clergy. On Japanese clergy said, shelter, housing is the most important. American clergy said medical services and priest sermon are the most important. Again, like we have, like a Japanese government has a universal healthcare, so they're less think about the healthcare, but in US it's different. And here, the researcher asked the reason why you think natural disaster relief is obligation. So far, like ethical duty and personal belief following the God will, mercy, to offer hope is a US main answers. And Philippines a little bit different. Why do you think so? Obligation following the God will is mainly, and mercy and ethical duty. Those are reasons. And Japan, why do you think so as an obligation? So first one is ethical duty, and second one is try to just listening what they say. So in Japanese Buddhist clergy, mainly listening. Yes. Okay, 5 minutes. Okay, sorry. And next. So next question, if you mention natural disasters during mass Bible study congregation, what do you say? So answer from American clergy. We ask people to pray, give money to people who are victims of natural disasters. They are very popular answers. And God will to love one another. They are landmarks of nature. I try to avoid saying it's God's will. God does not inflict pain or suffering on his people. If he did, he would be cruel, and I would not serve him. We can demonstrate our love to God through helping our fellow men, introducing biblical passage, be prepared, they will come, dying sometimes, trust God. And I show them in everything, there is in some good and bad, but God is still in control. Jesus is our shelter in the storm, help the victims, not the punishment. Encourage to, and those are typical answers in Philippines, encouragement to move on is very important. We must always prepare to have life's different difficulties and death, and trust God. And those are Japanese typical answers. We should think to our mother nature. We cannot control our mother nature because we are part of it. We are dying in 100% chance, and we don't know how we would die. You should die. You should be ready to accept your death. Just carefully listen to what the victim says. So basically, they are listening, more like looks more passive, but it's a different culture and different attitudes. So we have to skip a little bit. And don't look. However, Japanese clergy also mentioned, don't look back to your past, but go forward with hope. So there's some similarity also. And another question, what do you say to families who have lost family members to natural disaster? Those are typical answer. It is not God's will. People need comfort, not explanation in America. I prefer to listen while they talk, and words of comfort from God and words of hope. So answer from American clergy, another one, we pray for them and seek help in every way we can. God is God of all comfort in Bible. Never forget our God with you. Prayer is always helpful because our God will pray in reducing your pain. I am sorry and move to the here. Okay. There's only one person said, but in my church, I had a 63 family of members those died during Katrina. Was aren't as important as knowing the church is there for them or survivors. So next. So this is a Japanese typical answer. I prefer to listen while they talk. We pray for them and seek to help in every way we can. So there's a conclusion. Okay, similarity and differences. So between Christian and Buddhist community, there are very little difference between Philippine and American Christian communities. Although there was differences, Christian and Buddhist religious communities show their sympathy to the family members who lost their loved ones. Those are similarities. Next. For example, there three countries clearly said, I prefer to listen while they talk, and we pray for them and seek to help in every way we can. Don't focus on negative, keep their loved one memory alive in their heart. Okay, differences. Almost all Christian clergy thought natural disaster relief efforts are their obligation. American clergy also thought counseling with pastors can help natural disasters victims. Differences. Christian clergy focus more on comfort, reducing pain and hope, while Buddhist clergy focus more on listening and praying when they have a chance to talk with family members who lost their loved ones. So implication, mental health implication. Lot of clergy is a missing link for mental health professionals. However, clergy are essential for preventing PTSD symptoms. Clergy as a gatekeeper for maintaining hope. There are cultural differences related to victims' guilt and shame feelings, and also social workers and other mental health professionals need to provide psychoeducational, spiritual support for the victims. Okay, counselors, social workers, and other mental health professionals need to be aware of the findings and researches. And next, clergy should be educated, especially to talk non-judgmental and sympathetic attitudes. So need more money, funding. So financial resources and tax relief, etc. needed. And limitation. This is ongoing project. The sample number about 160 is small, but it is increasing. Only three groups, American and Philippines and Christian and Japanese Buddhists. So maybe more extent. Asking questions to only clerics maybe need more diversify, and only 18 females so far here. So thank you very much.
All right, so our last and final speaker is Bennett-Carpenter. He's a special lecturer in writing and rhetoric in the Liberal Studies program at Oakland University in Rochester, Michigan. His work basically engages rhetoric and psychological strategies for religion and culture. His recent publications include a work on the concept of the ideograph, hopefully I said that correctly, Ben, in the Journal of Communication and Religion, and on psychotherapist writings about dealing with the idea of one's own death for the Journal of Morality. So if everyone will welcome Bennett-Carpenter.
Thanks, Chris. Okay. All right, so this is called Against Silver Bullet Explanations for Religion, toward interdisciplinary conversations that allow for both consilience and divergence. So single explanations of religion from within one particular discipline are partial explanations and don't suffice by themselves. As an enterprise, the scientific study of religion will do well to continue to foster conversations across disciplinary boundaries in an overall team effort, moving on the one hand towards increased consilience, while also allowing, on the other hand, plenty of freedom for divergence. Depending on a person's kind of orientation towards different disciplines, probably most of us tend to lean one way or the other in terms of what we want. We want more teamwork, we want more unity, we want more agreement on maybe terminology, things like that. Looking at the study of religion as more of a big cooperative effort on the one hand, and then on the other hand, the opposite in a sense of what I just said sounds like it's too monolithic, it sounds too authoritarian maybe, or controlling, and people will then have more of a tendency to be oriented towards idiosyncratic elements within various disciplines, and actually value the tremendous diversity that comes through different methods, different theories, different content. Okay, so I'm sort of suggesting that possibly we can have both those things. So this presentation briefly highlights key contributions from disciplines such as biology and evolutionary anthropology and cognitive psychology. I can just only mention today, because of the time limit, evolutionary-oriented sociology, semiotic-oriented communication studies. And of course, these are just a sampling of what else could be brought in here. All right, so single explanations of religion from within one particular discipline are partial explanations and don't suffice by themselves. You think of, if some of you may be familiar with various card games where one particular suit is named as trump. Okay, so like in the card game Spades, Spades is trump. So even if in the course of the game, if someone plays an ace or a very high card, if someone has the opportunity to play a spade and trump that, it doesn't matter what other suit you may have, the spades trump. And in other games, other suits are sometimes named as trump. So if we play this maybe explanation game for religious behavior and ideas, we could pick which of the main disciplines will trump the others. So for example, if we take the social sciences as trump for a moment, the whole game will be played in terms of something like human behavior, ritual, human cognition, ideas, organizations, human affect, and relationships. So I'd suggest that something like this could sound pretty much like the norm for many attendees here at the Society for the Scientific Study of Religion, because SSSR tends to be pretty much rooted within the social sciences in large measure. With natural sciences as trump, we might move toward primary terms of molecular relationships, the transmission of sensory information in and from environments to bodies and brains, and to survival and reproductive strategies across populations, among many other key terms and concerns. So with humanities and arts as trump, then the game gets wild. Okay. So while not anything goes, sometimes it seems that way. Explanation itself as the so-called game can be interpreted very widely, and in some ways does not become even the main objective. It's not about explanation. It might be interpretation. It might be something else. Perhaps it's narrative. Perhaps it's poetry. All right, so these are just a few examples that come to mind for me, like the story "Everything That Rises Must Converge" by Flannery O'Connor, Tarkovsky's film called The Stalker, or a video or actual experience of a West African masked dancer in action. So most engagement with religion at large has been and continues to be through humanities and arts. Though this has rapidly been changing with continuing growth in the social sciences and relatively recent efforts in the natural sciences. And so for the scientific study of religion, I'd suggest that if that nomenclature is going to mean anything, we have to opt for social or natural sciences as trump. We do seek powerful explanations that may provide deep and wide understanding, but most certainly give better accounts of phenomena than anything else on the table. So while already multidisciplinary, and perhaps increasingly so, SSSR has its origins and main center of gravity in the social sciences, and probably will and should continue to do so. We can kind of shift our analogy, though, here for a second now, get out of the trumping sort of discussion. Maybe think about something that we sometimes hear about good science fiction. Sometimes it's said with good science fiction that the science element needs to cohere with our current knowledge of science. If it doesn't, if it contradicts our current understanding of science, then, I don't know, we might be getting into fantasy or magical realism or something like that. Okay, so the idea would be that wherever we are in the social sciences and to some extent, maybe even on the edges of the humanities and arts, that we would be aware, not be ignorant of what's happening in the natural sciences and in social sciences as well. So for some people, this is all common sense, nothing new, but I suggest it remains a point that has yet to be fully established as a main assumption here at the SSSR. At a minimum, we need to be reminded of this point if we already know it or if we already assume it. Most of us do tend to at one point or another, to become consumed with our pet fields, theories, disciplines, and explanations. And I say, well, we should, partly because we have to be consumed with kind of our pet project, our pet theory, things like that, just to get the work done. If we weren't, we wouldn't have the energy and focus to get it all done. So that's just part of getting work done. But sometimes we have to be reminded that this is just the one thing that I'm doing. All right, so as an enterprise, the scientific study of religion will do well to continue to foster conversations across disciplinary boundaries in an overall team effort, moving on the one hand towards consilience, term that essentially means unity of knowledge coming out of the work of Wilson, Edward Wilson, while also allowing, on the other hand, plenty of freedom for divergence. So E.O. Wilson is known widely for his strong and comprehensive argument for consilience, cooperation or unity of knowledge across all fields, not just in the social science, but even extending into the humanities and arts. Some people think this is a very common sense suggestion, and other people think it's reprehensible and very misguided. And now he's just come out with a new book, which I just learned about recently, and I won't be talking about that today. So as I mentioned before, some people see this effort at consilience to be very undesirable, naive, totalitarian, absurd. For example, if we were to reduce all artworks down to their chemistry, some people would just say how pointless. Okay, we're on the wrong level of explanation there. But Wilson actually is not arguing for ironing out all inquiry or explanations at all these different levels. He does argue for the integrity of levels and niches of analysis that cannot be done any other way than from that given level or that particular niche. So Richard Dawkins in The Blind Watchmaker actually has some very good sort of summary of this. We explain the behavior of a component at any given level in terms of interactions between subcomponents whose own internal organization are taken for granted. So there's an integrity to the various levels of explanation, to various pockets or niches of study. It goes without saying, he said, that the kinds of explanations which are suitable at high levels in the hierarchy are quite different from the kinds of explanations which are suitable at lower levels. This is the point of explaining cars in terms of carburetors rather than quarks. Wilson points to the tremendous productivity and power that are generated from shared knowledge base signaled by shared concepts and terminology across the natural sciences, all through these different disciplines. It's just so much a part of the business of everyday life in the sciences. So I wonder, why can't the social sciences do something, or he wonders that. We both wonder that, I guess. So while some would argue forcefully that the social sciences deal with a different sort of beast or phenomena, very simply put, roughly, people instead of nature, and it's foolish to try to force continuity where there isn't any, Wilson's highlighting the lines of continuity that could exist between biology, psychology, and sociology. All right, so I'd suggest that to not do this, and for some people this is all old hat, but it doesn't really, it's not really become the mainstream in many places. So while some people take this for granted, I'd suggest that to not do this is to kind of wander off into some idiosyncratic territory that might be more fantasy than reality. Now I do think there's a very, there's absolutely that place for fantasy. But then I would suggest let's not call it science. It's a different business. So I'm definitely against anti-authoritarian. I'm with the anti-authoritarian impulse and the fight against any totalizing moves. Definitely, if it means kind of lockstep scientism, things like that, I'm definitely against that. But maybe we look towards something like a cooperative pluralism, which might be, in a sense, these are sort of maybe some negative things to say, just as sort of maybe some suggestions for rules of the game. So in social scientific efforts, it suggests we want to not be ignorant of the natural sciences. What if we don't reinvent the wheel by using different terms for the same concept if it's already been established? And sometimes there's pressure, a lot of pressure to do this because for publications, for tenure processes, things like that, for just the whole concept of value added, like we've got to be doing research that's new and different. Sometimes this becomes a problem because several people might be doing the same thing in different fields, labeling it differently, or just putting slight variations on it. So this would be an effort, like, is there a way for us to not reinvent the wheel? And then attempt to find more points of contact between fields rather than differences and distinctions only, and increasingly understand the cooperative effort among sciences, both natural and social or human, rather than the competition only between them. So a good example of this, I think, could be Robert Sapolsky's outstanding course at Stanford on human behavioral biology. For the sake of time, I'm just going to move ahead here a little bit. So I want to mention, I may just get to at least one of the contributions here. So from biology, Jay Fairman points out in brilliant work on prayer postures in relation to evolutionary history, some religious behaviors are not only specific to particular religious traditions within the last few millennia, but also are rooted within that evolutionary history. He looks at these human behaviors that are similar in, not necessarily in function, but in form to other animals. And I'm running out of time here, but the essential contribution here is this idea of making oneself lower or smaller or more vulnerable behavior that's found in prayer postures, non-vocal prayer postures, that runs from the lower vertebrate all the way up into mammals and into humans. So I wish I had a little more time to talk about that, but I just refer you to it. It's pretty brilliant insight, and has a lot of implications for understanding religious behavior in general. You can also look to examples from cognitive psychology, which just suggest some of the work coming from evolutionary psychology, cognitive psychology that's summed up in Tanya Luhrmann's work, also Pascal Boyer. There's a nice summary of a lot of what's happening in cognitive psychology of religion in Tremlin's work from Western Michigan, Tremlin 2006. Well, obviously there's a lot more to say. You see all the slides I skipped there, but that's fine. I've had too much in there. But a few other areas. So evolutionary-oriented sociology, semiotic-oriented communication studies. All right, so, I mean, in a nutshell, just to kind of wrap up here, if I were trying to understand, for example, let's say it's a case study of evangelical Christians, maybe Protestant, maybe Catholic, maybe Orthodox Christian, that moves into a prayer position, all right, and is praying to Jesus as a person or something like that. From biology, I might be looking at the prayer posture, okay? From fireman's work, I might be looking at, this is making oneself lower or smaller or less than in a way to avoid conflict with potentially a higher power. From cognitive psychology, I might be looking at the person is referring to or understanding Jesus as a person, which fits within a cognitive architecture that was born of millions of years of evolutionary history and fits into the cognitive architecture that we've ended up with, and uses sort of variations on that person concept to be what that person thinks of as their faith. All right, and then we could move on to, and I'll wrap up here, but we could move on to even in things like semiotic oriented communication studies. We could talk about how that person sort of enters this, might say, a sort of a semiotic game space or a simulated space that allows for the imaginative world in a way that's somewhat similar to when we participate in video games, that freights in whole narratives, ideologies, and emotional payoff. Okay? So there's a lot more there, but I appreciate your listening and a few references there. All right, thank you.
I'd like to ask the speakers to come up in front. That way we can address any questions that the audience may have. So.
I have a small question.
For me?
No.
For them? Okay.
Mrs. Stanley.
Yeah, I guess, if y'all want to pull chairs, whatever's easiest for up here. Thank you. All right. What questions does the audience have for the speakers? Thomas J. Coleman III, yes.
I have a question for Ben here. Really enjoyed the presentation, but of course, perhaps had a slight quibble with some of the citations at the beginning in terms of the cognitive and evolutionary framework that you used. I wanted to get some of your thoughts on the consensus or lack thereof within evolutionary and cognitive psychology. I noticed you had Tooby and Cosmes and Boyer, and that certainly is one cluster of approaching evolutionary cognitive science, but it's also not the only one. So in terms of consilience, how would one account for kind of within discipline divides that I think would kind of be vast in the terms of cognitive science, where we have super modularity to the Cosmites here, and we have more of a Armin Gertz's approach, which is cognitive science as well, but taking into account much more cultural environmental variables, which Tooby, Cosmites, and Boyer more or less shove off.
Okay, great question. I mean, I think some of that may be just, it's tricky sometimes to know where do we need to cooperate and where do we need to fight it out, you know what I mean? And sometimes the fights have to be there, and whatever is the either the truth comes out or the winner comes out, one way or another. But I think that a lot of times even with some of the, you might say, bigger thinkers or the more influential thinkers, we still even sometimes end up in somewhat of the pet theory thing. I mean, even if it's a major movement, you could be the leader of a major movement. So my tendency would be to say that often we're seeing people conflicting over things that sometimes there may be more cooperation. I'll just give you one example here, and I don't know the answer to it, but I'm asking the question, and they're kind of D.S. Wilson has sort of laid out very nicely a kind of a summary of, and this is not E.O. Wilson, it's D.S. Wilson, but summary of the work in evolutionary psychology in terms of, is it adaptive, is it not, is it a byproduct, is it not, and here's kind of the layout of where everybody is. And I probably, maybe a little bit of my own bias, is my first move might be, let's look at the contributions of possibilities from all those areas. Now it's possible that only one of them is correct. But usually, I mean, I have a student, and I'll wrap this up here, but I have a student, we have these open-ended research projects, writing projects in a writing class right now, and she wants to write on the nature-nurture debate. And I try to be really open to her for them to be discovering what they need to discover, and I told her that and everything, but then I also said, but for this one, we might want to jump right to like, well, a lot of people will just say it's both, and it's not either or, and then we get into how, and so it's really, really basic, but I guess that'd be sort of a general direction I'd go in with that answer. I'd want to say, what are the contributions coming from both of these areas? So,
Thank you.
Yeah.
That answers my question.
Okay.
I would ask April. I'm sort of guessing here from your email address, but I'm thinking there's probably some technical, sort of theoretical understanding of music that undergirds some of your work. And I'm wondering if you've looked at the differences in terms of the actual aspects, the theoretical aspects of the compositions, and how those separate these different kinds of music, and how they sort of fall into different classifications, whether in terms of key structure or tonality, these sorts of.
That's a really interesting question. I haven't looked at the issues you raised, like theoretical musical issues, in terms of, like we could look at the form and structure, that kind of analysis of the different music. I haven't done that. But there is a lot of work that needs to be done on that. Particularly, the first thing that comes to my mind is what separates, what are the things that we can separate kind of Christian contemporary worship music? How can we separate that out from contemporary popular music? So that's one question. I think another question that needs to be explored is, and I have done some work on this, is, a lot of these churches in my study, they say, we use secular music, we use popular music. Well, that's not a monolithic genre, right? I mean, there's a lot of different kinds of pop music. There's a lot of different kinds of secular music. Even the difference between, like, and these are actual examples from my study, one church uses Van Halen for a certain service, and another church uses Katy Perry, and another uses Adele. And there are so many issues here that could be looked at, and I'm thinking particularly in terms of race and culture, because then I always ask them, so do you use any hip hop? And the answer at these particular churches is usually no. And so we could just go in a whole new direction with that kind of issue. So I've looked at it more, I guess, from I could say a more ethnomusicological perspective, not so much a music theory perspective. But yeah, it's a big area to explore.
Are you aware of any place where we see the music theory aspect?
Comparing specifically like contemporary worship music to popular music?
And here I'm just sort of fishing for references of.
There are a bunch of ethnomusicologists working on this right now. I don't know any music theorists. I mean, just from my own kind of there really isn't a huge difference in terms of musical structure between Christian contemporary music and, say, like what we call adult contemporary music in popular music genre. If I could just say, what I'm kind of interested in is recording practices, because I think you can definitely hear, this is just speculation, but I think you can hear instantly a different audio mix on Christian contemporary music than you can on pop music. And so I've never sussed that out, but I really think there's something there to look at. Yeah. But no, beyond that, only my own kind of guessing. Yeah.
Could I ask a follow-up question on that? What do you sense to be the difference between the two?
In terms of the audio mix,
Yes.
I'm not sure I have much to say beyond the fact that I've gone to several ethnomusicologist friends and said, I can tell the minute I hear a Christian song. You know, like I don't have to hear any lyrics. I can tell. So what is that? You know, because I mean, I have a trained ear, but I'm not an audio technician. You know, I don't have that specific but so I kind of feel like if I can hear it, I know something's there because I don't have the specific ear that you need for it. So I think that's something to do with vocal level. That would be kind of a first guess, like where the vocals are in the mix and how present the vocals are. And then I think, you know, I don't know, I'm speculating, but I think maybe for the way, you know, guitars are distorted or not distorted, things like that. But my first guess is vocal level, but I'm just shooting in the dark here.
The angularity of the sound.
Yeah.
The softening of the curve.
Mm-hmm.
Christian, which I think has got some interesting sort of suggestions about the purpose that it's used for. Is the idea of cohesion and pulling together, and you see that actually is reflected in the tonal spectrum that's used.
Yeah, yeah, and you know there has been some work on this idea of authenticity in popular music, and I think that would be a real fruitful area to look at too. You know, because the authentic is king in pop music, right? Like, I mean, well, not in certain forms of it. I wouldn't say Katy Perry and that authenticity is not huge there, but we talk about other kinds of popular music. You know, this notion of a guy with a guitar just singing his heart out, and that's kind of this American authenticity. And so looking at, you know, how is that different than what's going on in Christian contemporary music? And how is that acted out? I'm not totally sure what the answer is, but I'd like to discover it.
Can I ask a question?
Sure.
Sorry. So like it's the opposite side, like authentic music try to imitate like pop music is true, such as like country music try to imitate rock music, like this.
Yeah. So the issue of imitation is a huge one when we talk about contemporary Christian music. You know, Christian contemporary worship music is kind of a contested area among Christians and even among evangelicals. And people who don't like it very often will say it's not authentic. They're just copying what's on the radio. Now, as a musician, I want to respond, music is all about copying. Like, we are all copying each other. You know, this is a conversation. You know, so, but I really think that's, you know, that I want to listen to that. So what is it that's really being negotiated here when there's this, you know, oh, it's not authentic, they're just copying. And I mean, that goes to larger questions of what should the church be? Like, what is the ideal church for this group of Christians versus this other group of Christians? What is the ideal relationship between the church and the so-called culture? Does this group of Christians see a split between the church and the culture, whereas these other Christians do not? And it all comes out in the music.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah.
I have a question for Tatsushi.
Oh, yes.
It's on the question about the obligation to help question. And I was wondering about the Christians in the U.S. and then the Buddhist clergy in Japan. With the help question, do you have a sense that they have different understandings of what help means?
Okay. Yeah, it might be true because like help, much more like in Japan, much more like material help, so provide money or time. But maybe in the U.S. much more like a mentally or non-tangible help. So it might be true. So yeah, I had the same question, and what you said, like our like profession like social work or social science is tend to think about like one direction. So also we should think about much more cultural diversity and how can you recognize health meaning. So good question, I think.
Also for Tatsushi, I noticed in several of the places, and as you moved into your conclusions, you were talking about the provision of comfort. The comfort really was rising to.
Right.
And I'm wondering if you could say a little bit about the extent to which you think that comfort, in that sense, is synonymous with meaning.
Okay.
Is it more an affective level, or is it more of a cognitive?
Yeah. I thought this is much more cognitive, but the thing is, like, what like Benjamin said, it might be true and might be not true, because like culture difference there. So some might be cognitive level, more like a much more social meaning of comfort. So like tied together, or so it's very difficult to explain, but that's different level of comfort, differently.
We're running out of time, I think. So I would like to thank our panel for being here today. I also would like to say thank you for letting us record the session for online distribution. These will actually be available on the religiousstudiesproject.com. So if anyone in our audience would like to go and re-watch the session. We also have a number of other podcasts. So, but again, if everyone would give our panel a hand.